Hey everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about Death Knights in World of Warcraft lore. When the Horde was invading Azeroth in the Second War, 5 years after the opening of the Dark Portal, Gul'dan promised War Chief Orgrim Doomhammer to provide him with powerful warriors who could stand up to the human spellcasters that the Horde was having trouble with. At this point, many members of the Shadow Council were dead, but their spirits remained intact. He figured that if he could take their spirits and put them in physical shells, he could make powerful warriors. He knew that he couldn't use the bodies of dead orcs or ogres because the Horde wouldn't stand for the desecration of the honored dead. Instead, he decided to meld the Orc Shadow Council's spirits with the bodies of human knights who fell in the battles. And since Fel Magic was outlawed in the Horde, he made them necromancers instead. Working with Cho'gall, Gul'dan conducted bloody rituals, sacrificing orc necrolytes and harnessing their necromantic powers in gems, and succeeded. The first was Teron'gor, fused with the rotting body of a fallen Stormwind Knight. This created the first Death Knight, Gorefiend. These weren't like modern Death Knights. These were necromancers with superior intelligence and huge amounts of magical ability, preferring to use fear tactics, like raising the dead instead of fighting themselves. Death Knights have no need for rest or food, and could use their necromantic powers to rip life from their enemies. As more were created, Orgrim was sickened by them. They were created from the Shadow Council, who he blamed for destroying Draenor, and saw them as unnatural abominations. But they were effective, and necromantic energy was just as powerful as Fel energy. However, it didn't drain life from the land. The Death Knights were accepted into the Horde. Orgrim and the Blackrock Clan kept an eye on the Death Knights, with a plan to destroy the abominations and Gul'dan as soon as the Horde was victorious. The Death Knights were loyal only to themselves, even though they openly swore allegiance to the Horde. When the Horde sailed north to invade Lordaeron, they landed at Hillsbrad Foothills. For the first time in history, the Alliance and Horde armies clashed, and when the hooded Death Knights arrived, they rode skeletal steeds and raised slain human soldiers to turn on their former allies. They were challenged by Uther, Turalyon, and the other Paladins as they arrived in a white light, destroying the raised undead and sweeping away the corruptive fog. They were evenly matched in this battle, so Doomhammer used the Amani Trolls to find another way to Lordaeron's capital. As the Horde approached Quel'Thalas, the powers of the Death Knights and the Trolls' Witch Doctors began dwindling due to a magical barrier powered by runestones that prevented the Burning Legions from detecting their magic and weakened the powers of their enemies. Gul'dan turned some of these runestones into Altars of Storms, using them to transform Highmaul Ogres into highly intelligent two-headed ogres. Gul'dan was still seeking to make powerful allies, since the Death Knights weren't loyal to him like he planned. In any case, Gul'dan's actions restored the powers of the Death Knights and the other spellcasters. They used these powers to terrorize the countryside, cutting down every elf they could find. Then Turalyon and Alleria arrived with half of the Alliance army and pinched them between themselves and Quel'Thalas. They fought, but even with the enslaved red dragons, they struggled with the defenses of the High Elves. The Horde turned toward capital city in Lordaeron, and was even helped by the human king Perenolde in passing through the Alterac Mountains. They attacked capital city, and was again pinched between the forces of the city and Turalyon and Alleria as they arrived from Quel'Thalas. Orgrim called off the siege and retreated. As the Alliance chased down the Horde, now led by Gorefiend, fled through the Dark Portal. Before they arrived, the Alliance caught up with the Horde. The Death Knights worked to delay the Alliance, to give them time, and flee through the portal. Behind them, Khadgar destroyed the portal. The Alliance had won the Second War, but Gorefiend had to be the one to report that to the rest of their race on Draenor. Draenor was still dying, and the Horde was without a leader. Gorefiend was not willing to give up. He knew of many potent artifacts in Azeroth that could help with another invasion. The three Gorefiend had in mind was the Book of Medivh, the Eye of Dalaran, and the Scepter of Sargeras. The Death Knights wanted a world they could hold dominion over, and with these artifacts, they could create dimensional rifts. Not to Azeroth, but to other worlds they could settle, not on the dying Draenor. The Death Knights worked with the Horde, in exchange for the Death Knights eventually being granted a world of their own. Teron and Ner'zhul rallied what was left of the Horde's leaders, including Grommash Hellscream of the Warsongs, Kargath Bladefist of the Shattered Hand, and Fenris of the Thunderlords. They had been forced to sit out of the Second War, and they lusted for battle. The lingering power within the skull of Gul'dan and the leftover dimensional rifts to Azeroth was more than enough to open the Dark Portal up, which had been fortunate because the skull had been brought back to Draenor by Horde refugees and traded around as a prized trinket. Once they obtained the skull, Ner'zhul and the Death Knights began working to reopen the portal, and he succeeded. Almost immediately, Grommash Hellscream led the invasion into Azeroth, backed up by Teron and his Death Knights. They then constructed a frame for the portal, so it didn't need a constant influx of power, and they were joined by Kilrogg Deadeye, who had been watching over the Blasted Lands for the Horde's return, and was ordered by Gorefiend to go back to Draenor to rest. Danath Trollbane's army arrived and attacked the Horde, attempting to contain them to the Blasted Lands so they wouldn't invade again, until the rest of the Alliance arrived. While they skirmished, Gorefiend and the other Death Knights went to retrieve the other artifacts. The Death Knights, along with the chieftain of the Shattered Hand clan, Kargath Bladefist, went to Blackrock Spire to make contact with Dal'rend and Maine. This was disastrous. Dal'rend declared himself the war chief of the true Horde and said that Ner'zhul was a usurper and that they would conquer Azeroth on their own and would not help them. However, Gorefiend was then approached by Deathwing, who offered the services of the Black Dragonflight to find the artifacts. In exchange, they would transport a precious item to Draenor, which were large amounts of black dragon eggs that Deathwing was attempting to hide. Deathwing also told Gorefiend where the other two artifacts were, in Dalaran and in the Tomb of Sargeras. The Death Knights split up into 3 parties and rode to the locations of the artifacts. Gorefiend himself went to retrieve the Book of Medivh in Alterac. When they arrived in Alterac, Perenolde was deranged, driven mad by Deathwing. Gorefiend agreed to wipe out the Alliance occupying force in exchange for the book, which they did. So when Gorefiend arrived at Dalaran, Deathwing's black dragons laid siege to it, while Gorefiend and the Death Knights infiltrated the city and stole the Eye of Dalaran from an enchanted vault. The Death Knights going to the Tomb of Sargeras stole Dalen Proudmoore's ships, since the black dragons with them couldn't fly over the entire sea, and this Death Knight hunting party claimed the Scepter of Sargeras. Then the Death Knights made preparations to return to Draenor. Slowly, Khadgar figured out the Horde's plan to open up portals to other worlds, and they chased the Horde back to Draenor, where they were trapped. When the Alliance pushed the Horde back to the Black Temple, Ner'zhul and the Death Knights were already conducting rituals to open up those portals, but Ner'zhul was unprepared for the level of skill to open up these portals, and it spun out of control. Many holes were ripped into the fabric of reality, heading to many different places. Ner'zhul and his closest followers escaped through the nearest portal, then Draenor would be torn asunder and turned into Outland. Ner'zhul would be caught by Kil'jaeden and punished for not delivering the orcs fully to the Burning Legion. As punishment, Ner'zhul was turned into the Lich King, a being with necromantic powers that would be used by the Legion to soften Azeroth for another invasion. Most of the old Horde's Death Knights were killed in the Second War, or turned into liches by Kil'jaeden. Ner'zhul took lessons he learned as a leader of the Horde, and from when he worked with Gorefiend, to use his new necromantic powers to raise powerful Death Knights of his own. Prince Arthas of Lordaeron took up the fight against Ner'zhul's Scourge, taking increasingly harsher and harsher steps to fight them, until he eventually lost his grip on humanity. Believing he would save his people, he took up the cursed runeblade Frostmourne, led there by Ner'zhul. Frostmourne gave him power, but also stole his soul and was transformed into one of the Lich King's Death Knights. He then slayed those soldiers who remained loyal to him and raised them as undead as well. Thessarion, also one of these Death Knights, was forced to kill his mother by Arthas. Falric was also a soldier who was loyal to Arthas and turned into a Death Knight. While Arthas was gone on the expedition to Northrend, the Scourge mysteriously pulled out of Eastfald and vanished. Most of Lordaeron believed that Arthas had succeeded in defeating the Scourge in Northrend. This was actually done to make people believe that, so Arthas would be welcomed back, and it would be too late when they realized he was corrupted. Arthas returned with the huge Scourge army. He ordered them to stay hidden, besides a handful of Death Knights who accompanied him to the capital, shrouding themselves in cloaks. Arthas was welcomed back as a hero for defeating the Scourge. When he reached the throne room, Arthas fed Frostmourne the soul of King Tyrannus. Arthas and the Death Knights then began rampaging through Capital City in Lordaeron, killing the crowds that had come to welcome him home. Simultaneously, the Scourge relaunched attacks on the rest of Lordaeron. The Third War had begun. After killing his former mentor, Uther, and many of the paladins he trained under, Arthas then turned on Quel'Thalas to use the Sunwell in order to resurrect Kel'Thuzad, one of the Lich King's lieutenants, who Arthas coincidentally killed before he served the Lich King. While attacking Quel'Thalas, one of the Higher Elves, Koltira, was raised into a Death Knight. In the attack, Arthas also raised Sylvanas Windrunner into a Banshee and killed King Asarion and resurrected Kel'Thuzad. Arthas would then go on to defeat Illidan's attempt to destroy the Lich King and fuse with Ner'zhul, becoming one single Lich King. Unlike Gul'dan's Death Knights, the Death Knights under the Lich King possessed incredible unholy strength. They're stronger, faster, and more agile than they were in life. However, they don't possess free will like their counterparts, as they are dominated by the Lich King's consciousness. Kel'Thuzad raised Alexandros Mograine into one of the greatest Death Knights champions of the Lich King, after his son, Renault, killed him, who was corrupted by the Dreadlord Balnazar. His other son, Darion, found out his father was being held within Naxxramas and rallied the Argent Dawn to help rescue him. They fought through the horrors of Naxxramas, including Instructor Resuvius, the trainer of the Death Knights, Gothic the Harvester, who teaches the Death Knights how to raise the dead, and the Four Horsemen, the four most powerful Death Knights, including Thane Korthaz, Lady Belmu, Sir Zeliek, and Alexandros Mograine. When he found out Alexandros was a Death Knight, Darion fought him. But when another Death Knight moved to kill Darion, Alexandros fought against the Lich King's will just enough to move his body and block the blow to save his son. Darion took his father's weapon, the corrupted Ashbringer, from his body, with his father's soul inside, and fled Naxxramas. In the Siege of the Sanguine, an attack on Life's Hope Chapel, Darion stabbed himself with the corrupted Ashbringer to free his father's spirit and rouse the dead spirits underneath the chapel to fend off the undead. Unfortunately, Darion and the Ashbringer were then recovered by the Scourge, and Darion was raised into a Death Knight, like his father was. The Scarlet Crusade was able to keep their capital, the Scarlet Enclave, untouched by the plague. When the Lich King was planning an attack on Azeroth, he ordered an attack on New Avalon, a town controlled by the Scarlet Crusade, led by the Death Knight Darion Mograine, the wielder of the corrupt Ashbringer. When the Scourge marched on Havenshire, High General Abindus claimed to receive a vision from the light, telling her to take her most faithful and journey to Northrend. This became known among the Scarlet troops as the Crimson Dawn. The Scourge dealt a great blow to the Scarlet Crusade and raised the most powerful among them as Death Knights to serve the Lich King in Unlife, those who had dedicated their lives to killing the Lich King. Beneath Light's Hope Chapel, thousands of heroes of the Alliance are buried. The Lich King wanted to raise them to fight for the Scourge. He launched the Necropolis of Acheris, the Ebonhold, with the direct purpose of assaulting the chapel. High Lord Darion Mograine led the Lich King's Death Knights against the Argent Dawn, who were defending it. The Lich King told the Death Knights that this was another attempt to raise the champions buried there for the Scourge. In the fight, when Tyrion Fordring appeared, and the Lich King began draining Tyrion's soul, the Lich King reveals that this attack was actually a feint to draw out and kill Tyrion before he could rally the Paladins against the Scourge. This enraged Darion, being used as a pawn, and resisted the Lich King's will long enough to give the Ashbringer to Tyrion. Tyrion cleansed the Ashbringer and used this legendary weapon to drive the Lich King from the chapel. The Death Knights that participated in the battle found they no longer were under the Lich King's will. High Lord Darion Mograine pledged all the Death Knights to fight for the death of the Lich King, calling themselves the Knights of the Ebon Blade, and making their base in Acheris. Baron Rivendare, who ruled over Stratholme, took over as a Death Knight member of the Four Horsemen, the most powerful Death Knights, once Mograines were gone. This new order wanted to re-ally themselves with the Alliance and the Horde, so that its undead members could work with them to defeat the Lich King. The Death Knight Thessarion was tasked with delivering the message from the knights to the King of Stormwind. When he arrived, he was heckled in the streets, but he was allowed to see King Varian by saying he had a message from Tyrion Fordring, one of the most respected paladins of all time. On Tyrion's word, Varian decided to give the Death Knights a second chance. The dwarves in Ironforge are actually particularly accepting to the Death Knights compared to the rest of the Alliance. The Knights of the Ebon Blade, the Alliance, and the Horde then worked to defeat the Lich King. Larissa, Thessarian's sister, saw her mother's pendant on the Death Knight Thessarian and was convinced that he was the one that had killed her brother, not her brother himself. So she went to Northrend to find him, and she was eventually reunited with her brother, the Death Knight Thessarian. When the Lich King was defeated by the Alliance, Horde, Argent Crusade, and the Knights of the Ebon Blade under the banner of the Ashen Verdict, Bolvar Fordragon took up the mantle of Lich King, knowing that if there was no being to control the Scourge, they would continue killing. The world returned to a period of relative peace in relation to the undead, until Lady Sylvanas rebelled against the Horde and moved to attack the new Lich King. Bolvar realized that he needed to protect himself against Sylvanas, so he began raising a new generation of Death Knights and creating a new Four Horsemen. Sylvanas easily defeated this mustered force and the Shattered Helm of Domination, opening the portal to the Shadowlands. So hope you enjoyed this video about Death Knights. Please leave a comment, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and check me out on Twitter. You should check out my wife and I stream on Twitch. We stream there pretty much every day, and join the community on Discord. I would really appreciate it. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Don't be raised as a Death Knight unless you want to be really powerful. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.